welcome back. My name's Diana, this is my channel Bookish Di, and today I am wrapping up my January in reading. So in January, I started off decently. I read more books last month than I had in the last part of 2021. So I read 7 books, and aside from one that was just mediocre, I think I did a really good job of picking out books that I knew I would enjoy. So I had a pretty good reading experience overall, so let's get into it. The first book that I read in January was Hollywood Heroine by Sarah Kuhn. So I'd actually started this in December, and I didn't get around to finishing it because I was feeling really slumpy, but I did finish it first thing in January, and I really enjoyed it. So this is the 5th book in Sarah Kuhn's Heroine Complex series that follows Eve Tanaka, Aveda Jupiter, and Beatrice Tanaka. So this book is focusing on Aveda and Evie when they go down to LA to help supervise a TV show that's being based on their lives. And Aveda, this is narrated by Aveda, and it's dealing with a lot of change, which she doesn't really like because, you know, her friend Evie is pregnant. Bee's moved out. There are things that they've brought in new members into their team from the previous book. And so she's dealing with a lot of change and also dealing with, you know, her husband might be, has been approached for a new job opportunity. She's dealing with, hashtag nice white lady, Mercedes down in LA, and now there are vampires involved. So like I said, for the most part, I really enjoyed this. There were some flashbacks interspersed throughout the text that I wasn't a huge fan of. So throughout the time period between the first book that Aveda had narrated and this book, she's gotten married, and so we get flashbacks to the wedding, and I kind of wish that we had gotten like a novella or something, because I do think it's important that we see what happened and how that relates to Aveda and Scott's relationship now. However, I found the flashbacks just kind of clunky and not super, it just felt a little out of place within the rest of the narrative. However, I really liked the characters. I like the continued growth we get from Evie and Aveda in particular, and I really like the new characters, particularly Shelby, who's the main youngin' who we get in this book. And then I also this felt like Sarah Kuhn's love letter to Los Angeles and the places that she loves. So we get Rip Bodice shout outs, we get Griffin Park, we get a lot of restaurants in Little Tokyo. So this felt like Sarah Kuhn's love letter to particular areas in her city. So I liked that. So this got 4 out of 5 stars from me. I am sad to find out that the series is ending with the next book being published in July. So that's Holiday Heroine, and that's going to be following B. But yeah, overall, enjoyed this entry into one of my favorite ongoing series, and I am really sad that it's going to be ending soon. After that, I read Penric and the Shaman by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is the 2nd book in the Penric and Desdemona series that's set in her world of the 5 gods. So I had read Penric's Demon last year and really enjoyed it, and my library happens to have a number of the novellas, so I checked out this one. And again, I really liked it. So this is set like 5 years after Penric and Desdemona bond, and they are brought in to help with a murder investigation. Because in this world, not only is there the magic that Penric and Desdemona have that's centered on humans interacting with demons, but there's also shamanistic magic. And so there's a rogue shaman on the loose, and dedicant to the father, who's one of the 5 gods, is trying to find out what happened and find the shaman. And so Penric gets enlisted to help with that. So this was fun. This was part, you know, mystery investigation, part, you know, banter with Penric and Desdemona. And it definitely felt like setting up some new characters that we're going to be seeing later on in this universe. I also liked how it expanded the rules of magic as well, that we got a little taste of it in Penric's Demon, but we get to see more here. And you also get to see more of the intervention of the different gods in this in this world, in this book. So I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4.25 out of 5 stars, and I have a bunch of the other Penric and Desdemona novellas checked out now, so I'm hoping to maybe make it more, get further along in this series throughout the month of February, just because I really like Bujold's writing. I like Penric. I love Desdemona. Desdemona's like, may I have a little seagull as a treat? And I like the exploration of like uphill magic and downhill magic. And yeah, it's a great series. If you're looking for fantasy, like something that has like flavors of epic fantasy, but isn't like big chunky books, I would say read these novellas, because I'm only 2 in. I'm really enjoying it so far. After that, I listened to Shadowshaper by Daniel Jose Older, narrated by Anika Noni Rose. So I do have a physical copy of this book, but I just hadn't gotten around to actually reading the physical copy, and I heard good things about the audiobook, so I decided to use one of my Libro FM credits and grab that, and I really liked it. So this book is the first in a YA fantasy trilogy, and it follows Sierra Santiago, who is a young Afro-Latina teenager living in Brooklyn. And she is an artist, and she notices one day that a mural is crying and that it's starting to fade. And she gets drawn into this world of shadow shapers, that people who use spirits to do magic. And she finds out that her grandfather and her grandmother were involved. And so she's trying to figure out, why is the magic fading, and trying to track down this powerful spirit known as La Lucera. So I very much enjoyed this book. I really loved Anika Noni Rose's narration. I thought that was fantastic. And so I'm actually continuing this series on audiobook instead of in physical form, even though the cover on this is absolutely gorgeous. I really liked how Older crafts these worlds, and how he crafts his characters. He takes a lot of care in that, and the world that he depicts, the Brooklyn that he writes about, just feels so real and lived in. I also enjoyed the descriptions of the magic and how shadow shaping works, and how it's tied to Sierra and others' artistic expressions, and how there's not really firm rules. Like, there are some rules, but it's more of like doing what feels natural to you. I think my only complaint with this is, and this kind of goes into some thoughts I have about the second book, which I have since finished, although not in January, was I don't know if, because this is the first in a series, but it feels like it was written to be a standalone and then got expanded into a series later on. So like this book feels like a stopping point, even though there are other books. But that's not necessary. That's like kind of an observation on the whole in this series, and not necessarily confined to this book. I would say my other small quibble with this book is there are times where it felt like it went a little too quick. Like, it's not a super long book. Like, it's less than 300 pages and the print's pretty big. So yeah, at times it didn't feel like there was enough room to like breathe and process, but overall I really enjoyed it, and I definitely plan on finishing this series. Like I said, in audiobook. So I gave this another 4 out of 5 stars. After that was a reread for me. I was feeling like a little slumpy and I just wanted something familiar, so I reread Memory by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is the 10th book in the Vorkosigan saga, and I read it in 2020. I first read it in 2020, and it's basically Miles fucks around and finds out. This is definitely a turning point in the series where things that Miles had been involved with come to an end, but he then finds a new path forward, and that he continues on that path for the rest of the saga. I don't want to talk too much about it just because there's so many spoilers, but I love the fact that, we're at this turning point for Miles, and he's trying to figure out a way forward after he massively fucks up. And that leads to the massive changes that he goes through in this book. So this was, 5 out of 5 stars. I love this book. It's definitely my favorite of the Vorkosigan books. There's a lot of good stuff in it, and I just really love Miles Verkozigan, even if he is a massive little shit. Next, I read Pause and Prejudice by Alana Martin. This is the second book in a contemporary romance series set in Alaska. So this book follows Kelsey Porter and then her romantic interest, Tom. And yeah, so we meet Kelsey in the first book, and we find out that she's grumpy, that she likes dogs, that she had been really committed to the family feud between the Porters and the Lippins that we found out in the first book, but in this one she's kind of reevaluating that. And we also find out in this book that she secretly writes paranormal romance, and that because she's worried about the impact that might have on not only her reputation, but her family's reputation, has been kind of keeping it secret. And then Tom has moved in to the town, whose name I can't remember, and is opening a brewery with his friend Micah, and Kelsey gets roped into helping them, and sparks ensue. This one was fine. This one was just kind of mediocre. So I think my problem with this book, hi, Leia's decided to join me. I think my problem with this book is it felt too fast at times. So like a lot of the relationship development just feels like it happened off screen. So like at one point, like relatively early in the it feels like relatively early, Kelsey and Tom go to have a weekend getaway with her friends, and we never see it, which like we hear about it, and I feel like this would have been like, it would have been a great time to take, it would have been great for the book to take some time and show us that, to show how they react, how they behave in this relationship with other people. And then another component is Tom has a fear of dogs, and Kelsey's trying to help him get over it. And I'm not a psychologist or a therapist, so I don't know like how that works, but just, it felt like, I don't know, it felt a little odd. So this ended up getting 3 stars. I'm gonna finish this series just because the cute dog's on the cover, but it's definitely not my favorite. It's definitely something where it's just like, eh? I will say the groveling after the third act breakup was pretty decent, although the third act breakup was, ugh. It is what it is. Anyway, 3 out of 5 stars. Come for the dogs. The second to last book in January that I read was Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. So this is a cozy mystery, and it centers on Leah Macapagal, who is moving back to Chicago, from Chicago to her hometown of Shady Palms to help her aunt and her grandmother with their restaurant, because they've been dealing with bills, with a demanding landlord who's been threatening to keep them out, and bad reviews from Lila's ex. And so she moves in, she comes back, and she's serving early lunch to her ex and his stepfather, who happens to be their landlord, and her ex dies, and her and her family are suspected of murder. And so she and her friend Amina are trying to clear their family's name and figure out what is actually going on. So this is yet another cozy mystery about food, where I didn't have access to delicious Filipino food, which made me sad. However, I enjoyed it. I really liked how, like, the different cast of characters, and how even though it was a small town, it was a really diverse small town, and I liked that it reflected, I feel like, a reality of a lot of towns where there are different ethnic enclaves or different ethnic groups. And I liked the different characters as well. So you have Lila, you have her friend Amina, you have her aunt and grandmother, you have her aunties who aren't necessarily related by blood, but are by community. So I really enjoyed the cast of characters, including her 2 potential love interests. I think the one thing that kind of I didn't quite enjoy as much was, so Lila is dealing with trying to figure out how long is she staying in town? Does she go back to Chicago? Because she does feel stifled, and it felt like her decision to stay in town just felt really sudden. There hadn't necessarily been like a lot of buildup. But other than that, I did enjoy the book. I thought that it was a fun, cozy mystery, and I definitely plan on reading the second book. So I gave this one 3.75 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend it if you're looking for a fun, cozy mystery that feels a little different than what you might normally get. And then the last book I read in January was Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America by Ijeoma Oluo. So this I had picked up because it was the January Comuna Read pick that Jess Owens runs, and it had been on my radar for a little bit, and for the most part I did enjoy it. So in this book, Oluo discusses different ways white male patriarchy has impacted different components of American society. So she talks about the myth of westward, like the myth making behind westward expansion, particularly focused on Wild Bill Cody. She looks at the impact of education, of employment, of gender, and spends the last chapter discussing the impact on football. So I thought that parts of it were very well written, particularly the last chapter talking about race, masculinity, and sports, and what is going on there. I definitely think like that chapter in particular works very well in conversation with some of the chapters in Loving Sports When They Don't Love You Back, which was one of my top books from 2021. I also think that parts of this book work well in conversation with The Sum of Us, and then also Culture Warlords. The Sum of Us, which looked at the economic impacts of racism, and then Culture Warlords, which was looking at white supremacy and radicalization. One thing, however, that I found that wasn't really touched on at all, which I think kind of took away from my enjoyment of this, was there wasn't really a discussion about white male supremacy and queerness. So we do get a chapter on gender, but it's very cis-normative. Like it's just talking about male and female. There's no, and the chapter is called Fire the Woman, the Convenient Use and Abuse of Women in the Workplace, which, you know, what it was good, but I do think, especially given the arguments that she was making in this book, that there could have been discussion about what happens when people, especially males, especially men of color, don't adhere to standards of masculinity that white Americans have. And I think that could have been a really interesting discussion point. And it could have strengthened some of the arguments that she was making about gender and how perceived deviation of gender norms really threatens white masculinity. But it wasn't touched on, and it felt for me like it felt like an omission that just kind of weakened some of the arguments around gender, and I was a little sad that it wasn't touched on, because I do think it could have been a really interesting point. But overall, I did enjoy this. I think that if you're looking for a shorter nonfiction book that talks about white male masculinity and supremacy, this is good to pick up. I gave it 4.25 out of 5 stars. So that was my January books. I read 7 books. For the most part, liked them all. No true stinkers in the bunch, which was nice. So have you read any of these books? Do any of these sound interesting? Please let me know in the comments below. And thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.